So Mars leading in the decade or so leading up to the Mars Titan War is basically comparable, broadly comparable to what America was at the turn of the 20th century. It's a place of great potential, lots of resource wealth, lots of industrial might, but it's not really a superpower yet, but it wants to be. It's champing at the bit to be. It's basically acquiring new territories and making deals with other countries to become a superpower, but it's not really in the superpower status yet. The United States in like say 1898 when we went to war with Spain was not quite a superpower, but the superpowers of Europe, the empires of Europe, were looking at America kind of like, hey, they're getting kind of big over there. We need to maybe do something about this, or it's going to get out of hand. Mars was basically that way in the like 2280s, and the vital counterpoint to that is Titan, which in 2283 or 84, I can never remember which exact year I decided to have it be revealed, but sometime in the early 2280s, the so-called the Ramayana find was revealed on Titan, and this is those ancient, half a billion year old precursor alien ruins on Titan. Titan is basically a big frozen over supercomputer. And by studying these ruins and the artifacts that are stored there, humans hoped to revolutionize their science to a degree not heard of since the advent of fusion power in the 2020s, obviously, which followed on the heels of the Phoenix event, which we've discussed in previous episodes. And obviously, we'll discuss further as Petrichor continues to come out. So Mars is this sort of superpower in potentia, and Titan is sort of playing second fiddle to Mars. And they don't like that because they're also research wealthy. And now, as of like 2284, they have this huge bargaining chip, which is this massive, a valuable alien artifact, like reliquary, basically buried under the surface of their surface ice. And by sort of doling out patronage to people who study those artifacts, they can get fabulously wealthy. And by controlling the flow of these artifacts, controlling the flow of informational technology, of information, what do you call it? Intellectual property out of the study of these artifacts, they can become a superpower. Ergo, the rivalry that has existed between Mars and Titan for years already, it's ratcheted up to by 1,000%, because you've got these two, we've got these two colonial powers that are champing at the bit to be superpowers, and one of them has a bargaining chip, but it's not quite as powerful as the other one, which doesn't have the bargaining chip. That's Mars, and now they're butting heads.
So, in that world, and that sort of turn of the century Americana vibe of or almost of societal ambition, right?
Mm-hmm. Manifest
John
destiny.
manifests destiny. John Sampson grows up on Mars
Mm-hmm.
in the places and with the peoples that are left behind that aren't a
Yeah.
part of that destiny, or at least they don't
Well,
think
because
so.
that's the thing. That's the thing. You look at Manifest Destiny, there were a lot of people left behind in that in America and in historical America. You look at the people who are living in the tenement houses of New York, you look at people who are living in sod prairie farmhouses in Kansas and Oklahoma and so on in the turn of the 20th century America. For all of the pomp and circumstance that Manifest Destiny gets, which is rightfully being reevaluated nowadays, there is a lot of historical precedent for people being left behind by that. Not just people who were sort of swept aside or plowed under to make way for it, but people who were left in its wake. People, the poor classes, the working classes, people who were seen as disposable. And that's I think the sort of bent I'm getting from you as far as Tommy comes from, and especially his father and his father John as well, is they're the kind of people who they wouldn't necessarily be living in a tenement house, but they might be living in like a communal farm,
Well,
like.
let's explore that because we don't really know where John Sampson grows up in. Um, what's a city on Mars? What's a big city
Let's
on?
say the three biggest cities on Mars in descending order, are Aldrin City, which is the capital, Neridum, or Neri, I think it's Nereidum technically because
Yeah.
it's named, which are nymphs, and then Orlena. Um, so really, those are the three biggest cities. But I almost see John Sampson as coming not from one of the biggest cities, but some from one of like sort of the satellite cities, because the thing is, a part of Mars in the last decade or two of the 23rd century being in this sort of superpower and pretentious state is that it doesn't have huge cities yet. Because you got to remember, Mars in 2292, which is when the Mars Titan War starts, only had a population of about 34 or 35 million. Only had about the same population the US had at the time of the Civil War. So it's not this huge bursting with people place. So even the big cities probably only have like a couple 100,000 or maybe a million at most.
Do you see? So from what I remember, some parts of Mars you don't need to have a breathing apparatus outside.
That's actually a good that dovetails perfectly with what I was about to get into based on what I was saying actually, because the thing about having there not be huge cities yet and having there not be all that is, and Mars being, as I keep saying, a superpower in potential, it's not just a superpower in potential, it's a culture in potential, because Mars at the turn of the 24th century is is very much also like, as I said, very much like America at the turn of the 20th century. But it's deeper than just the way they're becoming a superpower. It's also in the way their culture is forming. Because America at the turn of the 20th century was only about what 120, 150 years old, less than that, less than 150 years old. If we count the the age of America to when it was founded back in the 1770s, America at the turn of the 20th century was only about 125 or 20 or 130 years old. They're give or take. Mars at the turn of the 24th century, which is when the Mars Titan War takes place or is about to take place, is also about 200 years old. So it's a little older, but it's on par with America at the turn of the 20th century, especially considering to build everything on Mars from scratch. It's not like there's stuff that already existed there. Because even when America was founded, there'd been here for 150 or 100 something years. But because of that, they're fleshing it out. There aren't really big bodies of standing water like the Argyre Sea and the Hellas Sea, the Marineris waterway. There aren't really places where you can breathe outside with maybe minimal equipment or no equipment. It's becoming that, but it's not quite there yet. It's right on the cusp of that. And that's part of the hardship, is a lot of the work would be devoted towards building that vision of Mars. If you'd watched through The Expanse, at the start of season 2 of The Expanse, and they introduced the character Bobby Draper, who's a Martian Marine and a badass. Love the character. She is introduced doing a training exercise with her fellow recon Marines on Mars. At the end of this training exercise, you see her standing on the edge of this canyon in Mars where they've been training, and she looks out over the canyon and she sort of has this vision of the canyon transforming into this lush green waterscape with like water and stuff coming through it. And it's basically her seeing what the future of Mars could be if they continue to work hard. And Mars is becoming something. And the people sense it, but a lot of the people, even the people who are working hard to make it something, they're not necessarily able to take part. It's like people who say, oh, well, you're going to lay the foundation of a cathedral you'll never see finished. They're working their fingers to the bone to build this cathedral or to build this vision of Mars, but they know they're probably going to die long before it ever comes to fruition.
Well, let's dig into there. So would it be a thing where you have like a settlement, and then the people of the settlement are constructing atmospheric domes, and the domes where they're living under domes, and then
Pretty
but
much, or living underground, living in lava tubes, living in tunnels that they've dug through the rock, living
yeah.
in I mean, a lot of it would be, yeah, domed over canyons, and that's the thing is, I think we probably discussed this in our world building about Mars episode, which is I think sometime last year now,
Yeah,
um, about how like a lot of the people on Mars, especially in the early decades and even early centuries of Martian settlement, lived in canyons and dome and canyons and craters that were easy to dome over and then lived underground beneath those in further in series of tunnels and catacombs you could have where you could keep atmosphere in easier. Because
sure.
again, the number one problem with Mars, aside, I mean, there's various problems with Mars. There's radiation because there's no real magnetosphere or atmosphere. Old, but the number one problem for humans, and because this stems into several other problems, the number one problem is the atmosphere is so thin. The atmosphere is so thin that if you were to stand on the surface of Mars, your blood would boil because there's no atmospheric pressure to keep your blood liquid. It would try and turn into gas.
So John Samson grew up under a dome.
Well, I think it would be a mix of both because you would probably live under the dome and work under the dome, which you might sleep in the tunnels because again, because there's no real magnetosphere, you would want to sleep somewhere where the cancer rays coming from the sun can't get to you.
Could the dome protect them from the cancer rays, magnetosphere, whatever?
To a certain extent, yes, but it would have to be. I mean, yeah, foreseeably, because there could be technology we haven't thought of. Because this is even the turn of the 24th century is almost 300 years in the future. It's 270 years in the future, so that's
So
for that's possible.
we could conceivably say that the domes allow them to walk underneath the dome without getting the cancer, the bad cancer stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
Again,
yeah.
you can hear my liberal arts degree coming out, I promise.
You're
Uh,
fine, dude. Believe me, I had everything I've ever known about like Mars settlement, Mars colonization. I learned from watching documentaries on like Discovery Channel
you
and
did
YouTube.
also work at NASA for a bit. So
Yes, but I was a science writer. I was interviewing people who specialized in this stuff. I wasn't actually doing it. I wasn't
listen,
the
I
actual
think the
practitioner.
janitor who works at NASA is pretty fucking cool. Like, I would be cool to be the janitor at NASA. I would take that job. But anyway, so John Sampson grew up under a dome. I even love that as the opening line to a book, right?
It actually does sound pretty good.
And also thematically, the great part about a dome is that you can it symbolizes he's trapped. He's looking at something better, but he can't because there's a barrier in the way. There's all this like narrative symbolism in it, right? He can see the stars through the dome, but you
Mhm.
know, um his whole culture is about the mine, right? In the lava tubes and stuff and
Yep.
building the city underground. Um Let me ask you this: in Erebus effect, what is the city? Does Janet go to Aldrin City?
Janet goes to the outskirts, sort of outskirts of the Aldrin City like area, but no, she does not go directly to the city. Janet in Erebus from the Erebus effect um, is based out of New Gale,
Yeah.
which is on the basically on the shores of the Argyre Sea, which is in the let's see the Republic of Argyre, which is the capital of which is Nereidum, which is one of the three biggest cities on Mars.
Okay. I was just seeing if I can connect it there somehow. Like, oh, they built the places that she went or something, but that's fine. Um. All right. So John Sanson grew up under a dome, and he probably the dome covers a mine, right? Because I would imagine if I know capitalism, like I think I do, they're gonna build settlements that increase the sort of the habitable portions of Mars, probably around like mining places. It's got to be worth someone's money. And
Yeah,
so,
it's the people are going to move where the jobs are, and the jobs are going to be where there's money to be had.
so I imagine John Sampson grows up in a mining community.
Yep,
And
mining and industrial. because
Yeah.
that's actually, that actually serves two purposes. Because industrial, and it can be mining can be part of the industry, like mining and then processing ore. The thing about mining and processing ore is it increases the greenhouse gases, which if you increase greenhouse gases, you're not only increasing the atmospheric density of Mars, you're also increasing its warmth.
There you
So
go.
it's kind of a three-hit punch. You're generating money for the people who are sponsoring all of this.
Yeah.
You're increasing the atmospheric density of Mars, and you're increasing the temperature of Mars, which makes it more livable, which then allows more people to move there, which then allows the people making money off of the endeavor to make more money. Everybody wins.
Everybody
Some
wins.
people more than others.
Some people win more than others.
It's basically the way I envision a lot of like southern Mars, like the southern highlands of Mars, because the reason I say southern highlands is because like the northern maybe third of Mars is basically a big like depression. They call like it's got a name which I can't remember, but it's basically the part that we usually when you see a terraformed map of Mars and on
Mhm.
in any media, the northern part of Mars is like all an ocean. But the
So,
southern part that's very cratered and sort of rougher, I basically envision a lot of that, at least the parts that are inhabited, is being sort of like the opening shots from the Blues Brothers, where it's kind of like this. It's basically like Gary, Indiana,
sure.
sort of like
Um,
this industrial landscape, or like the start of Blade Runner.
what do you think they mine?
Iron,
So just
and
iron.
other things that materials you would build stuff out of.
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
I mean, look at what Mars is. Mars is called the red planet. Why is it called the red planet? Because of iron oxide. Iron oxide is just rust. But what is it rusted? It's rusted iron. So there's iron all throughout the regolith and mantle and everything. You can mine that and you can turn it into more structures, which then mine more iron, which turns into more structures, which allow you to mine more iron. It becomes a self-sustaining industry.
Yeah.
Becomes a feedback loop industry where you're siphoning off maybe 10% or 20% of what you're generating to sustain industries elsewhere, but you're putting the rest of it back into the industry to make the industry grow, and that's you're still profiting.
Yeah. And John Samson's dad could have iron lung.
Yeah.
Like you could do the coal lung allegory. And
Because it wouldn't just be iron, there'd be other things. There's probably rare earth metals and all sorts of stuff. And a lot of that stuff is toxic. You
uh,
look at guys who mine selenium here on Earth or platinum, a lot of or even gold, a lot of these things, they're not very good for the human body, especially when you're in close proximity for them for years at a time.
yeah. And I love the idea of him coming from a whole lineage of miners, but he doesn't
Mm-hmm.
want to be a miner. He doesn't want to live his life in a mine.
Yeah.
And so, okay, he lives in a domed mining community where the mines that they're using, um, where they're mining out the iron ore, will also be the site of future cities one day because they're doing two birds with one stone, right? They're iron,
Yeah.
they're taking out the iron ore, but also they're making room for underground settlements on Mars, which I think is
Yes.
pretty cool.
It's
Now,
it's kind of like if you mixed like I think you hit on a perfect analogy, at least one half of a perfect analogy. This setup is kind of like if you mix the coal fields of like Appalachia
mhm,
with, say, Dubai.
yeah,
I know that's a weird analogy, but bear with me. It's basically like if you mix the resource extraction bonanza of like West Virginia in the like early 20th century to mid 20th century, whatever, with the massive, construction and commercial, like property boom of say Dubai and the Dubai or United Arab Emirates today.
yeah,
Because basically, like you said, what you're doing is you're taking sources out of the ground and you're putting society back into the ground. So
yeah.
you're mining things that are rich. That money generates capital for people to then move to Mars and continue to grow the society.
What do you think this settlement should be called?
Um,
I love the idea of them having romanticized United States history.
Yeah.
Because I grew up around either Appalachian coal miners or the descendants of Appalachian coal miners, and they all
Yeah.
romanticized Confederate history. Many of them, not all of them, but a lot of them did.
Mhm.
And and it's good to know where you come from, and it's good to know kind of like your history of your people and stuff, right? It's good to know the whole story and like take the bad with the good, you know. That is to say, slavery bad. I love the idea of them applying that same sort of mindset to United States history.
Mhm.
So, I mean, there's probably already going to be a Washington settlement somewhere, right?
Yeah, let me see. In fact, I may even have, if you can bear with me for just a second, I'm gonna
Go right
open.
ahead.
I've got a drawn map. I think you might remember that I had an actual like hobbyist cartographer draw a map of Mars for me a few years back. He may have put a Washington on there. Let me take a look. Yep, there's New Washington.
Okay.
I'll
Is
it's
there a new
all
Philadelphia?
I don't think there is, and we could put that probably in something maybe a little bit better place. Because again, I'm not necessarily going off this map for everything. I'm just using it sort of as a source of inspiration. Because I think the lore has even changed a little bit since I had him make this map. Because yeah, it's actually it's set in a different year than the stories are set. But anyway,
We can always update it later. I love the idea of, since they're miners and they're miners that sort of romanticize their ancestral past. They'd call it New Philadelphia, since Philadelphia was such an important part of the American Revolution. Uh,
mhm.
and such so many important early things happened there. And would they have? They'd probably have some sort of schooling, right? For
Yeah.
probably, you think since most of modern American public education is based off the old schools that were kind of built around like factories. Um,
Mhm.
these
Oh,
schools,
you have no idea how right you are. There's a bit in Connections by James Burke, which I think I've recommended you to look at at some point in the past. They talk about basically all of the modern standardized education comes from a form of training. Basically, it was put together by this married couple that tried to standardize everything so that everything was the same, so that it could be taught easily.
yeah,
And that's basically where it comes from.
yeah, and
Like training things by rote memorization.
yeah, and the things they were training were it's it's good to give, if you have a nation of tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people, it's good to give everyone to get everyone on the same page. You have to know like a same general unifying story, and you have
Mhm.
to have the kind of same general base of knowledge. That's great. But
Yeah.
um you know but I what I'm thinking for this is the school that John Sampson goes to is put on by the minds, and it teaches kids to read, but teaches them how to read manuals for the minds. It's training the next generation of the workforce from childhood, you know, and they'll have a lot of the same trappings of our current education system, but it'd be like, oh, you can do math, but the math is how many, you know, pounds of ore per square inch or whatever. I don't know, but
Mhm.
I'm not a miner, clearly,
Yeah.
I'm
Well, we can
three
research that,
generations
of
removed from
course.
the mines. So, um, and
The closest I've ever been to mining is playing Minecraft. So I'm right there with you.
there you go. I'm going off of secondhand stories I heard that took place 100 years ago. But there was and 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 maybe there's a teacher that John Sampson has that really believes in education. Yeah, part of me worries if this is cliche, but this is workshop. So there's no such thing as cliches in workshop.
Mhm.
where his teacher really believes in education, but everything around him is built toward the practicality of succeeding in the mine, you know. But John Samson's like, oh, maybe I want to do this, and maybe I want to learn about art and the world or whatever. And his only other option is enlisting. And
Well, because see, I wanted to run an idea by you that I had.
talk to me.
Because the way I see it is maybe what happens is, and this is again, we're workshopping, so it's just an idea I'm throwing out. Say the Mars Titan War starts in 2292,
Yeah.
because at least based on my current thinking, the war starts with some sort of attack. It's kind of like a Pearl Harbor type event, or Pearl
Yeah.
Harbor or 9/11, what have you. It's not on the level of Phobos being blown up. That happens much closer to the end of the war or at the end of the war.
Sure.
Um, but it's enough that it gets Mars and the ICA to get involved in the war,
Yeah.
to go to war with the Titan Pact, which is basically the Warsaw Pact of the Outer System. And basically, what happens is when this happens, John Stampton is just on the cusp of deciding, well, do I join the military? Do I go to the mines? Do I try and make something of myself? And this is what seals. This is what, you almost say seals his fate. This is what clinches his decision, because he's like, oh, I'm 18. Because I see him being born in, say, like 2274 or
Yeah.
thereabout. That means he's 18 in 2292. He enlists either that year or the following year when he's able to, and then is trained for a year and then gets deployed, within a year of that. So he basically
Yeah.
spends 3 or 4 years in the war.
And I love the idea of him never feeling like he fits in. And maybe this is to him, and he's a kid, and maybe this is how he gets acceptance. Maybe this is how he fits in, you know, because he's not good at the mines. He's never going to be a miner,
Yeah.
not a good one. And, you know, but military service always respected, especially by the working classes.